Hello, and welcome to this US 275 Scientific Ethics lecture on understanding clinical studies. And what we're going to be looking at is going to be the development of a new drug. And so we're going to assume that we've supported research in a variety of areas to try to understand kind of what is the cause of disease. And so what we take a look at is, in many cases, research that's referred to as preclinical research because it's going to be research that's conducted in a laboratory. Preclinical means that it's being done before what you're working with patients to determine if it's safe, if it's effective. So what we're looking at is research going on within the laboratory for a period of time. In many cases, doing experiments on animals or just doing experiments on cells that are a model for the disease you're looking at. You're going to try chemicals or components that are thought to have an effect or related to molecules that you think are going to have an effect. So you're going to be testing them over a period of time to try to understand kind of the basic chemical and biological kind of characteristics of the chemical compound that you're working with. And then in many cases, the companies or the researchers that are doing this preclinical research are going to make slightly different variations of the chemical molecule that they're working with to find out if there's a better molecule or in essence a better chemical, kind of related chemical for treating the disease that we're trying to study or to find a cure for. So the preclinical testing, again, is done to kind of understand once we've got a molecule that looks interesting, what we're going to be doing is a whole range of laboratory and animal studies, which often takes another 3 or 4 years, where you go through and try to prove, or at least get good evidence of what the drug or this chemical is doing against the cells or the organs or the individual that we're trying to use as a model for the disease. And in many cases, we're going to be looking at it in terms of safety. So is it a good drug for treating cancer, but it kills half of the rats that we inject it into? Probably not the best thing we want to try on human beings. Or is it something that kills all of the cancer cells and the rats are doing fine? And if it kills the cells that are sick, the cancerous cells, without affecting the other things, that makes it interesting. That means it's going to be something that's going to kind of move on in this process and be studied a little bit further. And so that once you've got a chemical or presumptive drug or a drug that they're in the process of developing, then you've got to start thinking about, is it time to move this into clinical trials? Is this the point where we can start testing this on human beings? And so what you're going to end up doing, and again, we're looking at this as kind of the proper process of going through and doing new drug development, is that you take all of the evidence from the previous experiments. You describe all the clinical studies that you want to be doing. You describe what was learned about how the chemical works on the cells and on the bodies. Talks about all the detrimental things that have been going on. Does it cause 1% of the cells to do something, or does it cause diarrhea and 5% of the animals that were treated with it, or other things like that. So these are like the adverse effects or the other things that the drug can control. And then it also has to have the approval of the institutional review board saying that they've looked at the study and feel that it's going to be done in an ethical and proper way. Once you have all of this information, and this could be thousands upon thousands of pages long, you submit, or at least the researcher submits, an investigational new drug application, the IND. And so that's filed with the FDA. And so the FDA is going to have other scientists are going to review all of this to make sure it looks good, so that we're not, testing things that are potentially harmful to humans on humans. And if this is approved, then the drug can go into clinical studies. And so if we take a look at clinical studies, what we're going to see is that there are going to be a series of steps along the way before we get a drug that's available that a doctor can prescribe for you, and you can pick it up at your pharmacy. The first phase, phase 1 clinical trials, are to test the safety of the drug. And so what they do is they come up with healthy volunteers. And so you can see calls for this at some medical centers, or occasionally it'll pop up in your social media feed or something like that that says, okay, we're looking for healthy volunteers to test the safety of a new drug. And so under normal circumstances, about a year, they're going to test between 20 and 80 normal healthy volunteers. They're going to give them the drug and make sure that that dosage of the drug that the patients take doesn't cause any harmful effects, doesn't cause the side effects or the adverse effects that people are warned about when they're taking a medication. And so the idea is that if it gets out of phase 1, this is a drug that doesn't make healthy people sick. Just looks at safety. It doesn't look at whether or not it's going to be effective at treating the diseases. When we're taking a look at the development of a COVID-19 vaccine right now, what we're seeing is they're abbreviating these phase 1 clinical trials, and they're trying to do what would normally be done in a year in a process of probably 2, 3, 4, 5 months, kind of accelerating the process in here. And there's a risk in that, because there may be long-term effects, probably not with a vaccine, but with some of these drugs, where you want to give it to the patient and monitor the patient for a period of time to make sure that there are no lingering effects that appear later on. So in the phase 1 clinical trials, what we're looking at is to test the safety, but we're also going to try to understand how the body responds to the drug. And so often if you sign up for a phase 1 clinical trial, you're going to agree to take the drug, and then they may take blood samples, or they may take urine samples, or things like that, so that they can have a better understanding about how quickly is the drug digested and absorbed within the body, how is the drug distributed through the body, is it only kind of close to where it's absorbed, or is it getting kind of all the way through the body? It's important, how's the drug metabolized and excreted, how's that drug kind of broken down within the body, and then those waste materials kind of excreted normally within the urine. That's why you would take a urine test with many of these things. And they'll try to assess what is the duration of the drug. Is this a drug that has to be taken multiple times a day, or is it something that's going to have its effect, taking it once a day, and you just supplement it by taking another pill, another dose in a following day. Assuming all of this goes well, what we're going to end up with is moving into a phase 2 clinical trial. And so you got to get approval from the FDA for that. And the goal of the phase 2 clinical trials is to determine that the drug is safe and effective. So continue focusing in on the safeness. So the safe was the focus of the phase 1, but now we're going to say, is it safe and effective? And so what we're going to be doing, again, in a controlled study, so not like some of the stuff we've seen kind of in the news coming out, with possible treatments for COVID-19, you're going to be looking at a situation where you're going to work with patients, normally about 100 to 300 patients, over a period of about 2 years normally. And what you do is you give this experimental drug to patients that have the disease, and you see if they get better. And at the same time, you would have another group of patients, kind of a control group of patients, that would be getting kind of the standard of care. And so what we're going to be doing is finding out that is the new drug that they're developing better than our current method of treating the disease? And that's what they're looking for. So they're not going to say, okay, you sign up for this study, and if you get the new drug, you get the drug. And if you don't, we just see how bad the disease progresses. It's usually kind of ethically compared to whatever is the standard of care, standard treatment for that disease without this new drug, which is going on. Normally, this takes about 2 years. With COVID-19 this spring, we're seeing studies that are kind of racing forward with this. Issues we can discuss at some point on that, making it kind of questionable scientifically, questionable ethically. But there is an importance to trying to get a cure very, very quickly. So the idea is that, again, we test whether or not this drug is safe, it's not causing the individual to get sicker or have other types of problems, and is effective at treating the disease. Now, if it comes out of this and it looks like it's safe, it's effective with a small group of people, are going to be better off with the treatment of the disease, then you move into phase 3 clinical trials. And phase 3 clinical trials are going to test the efficacy of the drug. So this is, again, doing the same types of things that we've done before. So you continue taking a look at the safety of the drug, continue taking a look at whether or not the drug is effective at treatment, but then we take a look at confirming the effectiveness. Is this something that works in a range of patients with a range of disease progressions? Is it something that is better than the treatment that is out there right now? Are there different dosages that we need to look at? So, maybe people with larger body masses need a higher dose than people with smaller masses. This is what you see with, different dosages of like ibuprofen or Tylenol. So, kids may get, a small dose where, adults may get a larger dose. A lot of work in the phase 3 clinical trials is taking a look at the ease of use. Is it something that it's easy for a patient to take on their own, or is it something that really needs to be done in a hospital setting? Keep an eye on the side effects and the adverse reactions. So they may not appear when you've only got 100 or 200 or 300 patients, but when you're looking at thousands of patients, then you're going to start to see some of these rare side effects or adverse effects occurring. Again, these are done in a controlled setting, normally within a clinic or a hospital setting, where the doctors can monitor the patients. Physicians and scientists are going to monitor the patients. In many cases, collect blood, collect urine samples, continue the stuff that was being done within the phase 2 clinical trials, do it with different populations. There's some treatments that work better in some individuals than others. What is going on that we can do to try to understand what are these differences in the different treatments? And all of this is done in the phase 3 trial. If you get through all of this and it still looks promising, you go back to the FDA and you supply a new drug application, where basically you take all the information that you've ever learned about this, all of the scientific evidence, all the experiments, everything all the way back to demonstrate the safety and effectiveness. Safety, again, doesn't cause a worsening of the condition or other effects. It's effective at treating whatever the disease is that we're taking a look at it. It's often about 100,000 pages in length, and then it's submitted to the FDA. Their goal for review is about 6 to 10 months to review all of this information. So think about if you've got a scientist or a reviewer that needs to read 100,000 pages, and be able to critically read it and understand it and assess whether or not everything was done properly. It's going to take a little bit of time. The goal is 6 to 10 months. In 1993, it was about 27 months for review. Currently, the last date I can find is from a couple of years ago. This is now in the order of about 24 to 30 months. They're still taking a long time, but again, it's necessary to be able to do this and make sure that any new drug that's developed is being tested for safety and effectiveness. Now, the FDA is trying to speed up the process, the review process. And so, as we've seen now, again, with COVID-19, there are ways in which we can fast track the review process. And so, again, with COVID-19, we're looking at a situation where we have an unmet medical need with a serious condition. So, about 5 to 10% of the patients with COVID-19 are dying, or at least going on a respirator. And a percentage of those are dying. So we have a serious condition, we have a serious unmet medical need, and so we're seeing some of these rapid studies coming through, and the FDA is reviewing them in a much faster way than what you would normally be doing. We can also see breakthrough therapy, where a drug is to treat a serious consequence of the disease. So again, like COVID-19 causes death or disability, this is an area that is expedited in the review process. So the ways the FDA is speeding up the review process is that they're giving an accelerated approval. So they go through and they may look at an intermediate clinical endpoint in a serious condition. And so like COVID-19, they're going to look at patients that are treated with the drug and they're coming off a respirator faster. And if they're coming off the respirator faster, they're on the path to recovery. And so you don't have to look at their long-term recovery for 4, 5, 6 months out of the hospital. You can just assess it that they're off the respirator, they're breathing better, their lungs are working better, and that's a good outcome. Given it priority review, again, because the drug has potential significant improvement over existing treatments or the lack of the treatment, with the goal to act within 6 months. And we're seeing the FDA doing that again with different treatments as we're going into this summer. After the FDA approval, the new medicine is available for physicians to prescribe. But that's not the end of this process. And so the drug may be manufactured, it may be kind of released so that doctors can prescribe it. But the company then has to provide periodic reports depending upon what drug it is and what's going on. These may be annually or these may be quarterly reports going to the FDA, where you're going to be talking about cases of adverse reactions. So you're going to continue to monitor the patients. If you take a drug and you have a bad effect to it and you tell your doctor has to report that to the FDA so they can keep track of that. They have to report it to the company that's producing the drug so that they can kind of control and learn from what's going on with these drugs and treating these diseases. A lot of quality control records. Ideally, you don't want to recall on a prescription drug, because in some cases it disrupts the supply of the drugs, or it could cause contamination. If we've got to do a recall because the drug isn't working as well as what we want it to, and so they need to make sure there's good quality control about what's going on. And then, even though we've got approval to use this drug for the treatment of something, we then often go into phase 4 studies. Often we go into phase 4 studies where you basically look at the long-term effects of the drug. So if it's a drug, maybe not one for COVID-19, where you're only taking it when you're sick, but if it's a drug for depression, a drug for anxiety, a drug for high blood pressure, what are the effects of taking the drug for 1 year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years? Does it cause long-term problems down the road that we're not going to pick up on very early on? And so again, the company is going to be continually reporting this to the Food and Drug Administration, again, to make sure that the drugs that are available to us are going to be as safe as possible and as helpful as possible for the treatment of diseases. In the phase 4 clinical trials, as I said, they're often referred to as post-marketing studies. We're going to continue to collect information on the risks, the benefits, and the optimal use, as well as the long-term effects of drug use. Now, there are instances in the history of the Food and Drug Administration, the history of kind of medicine in the United States and the world, where as a result of phase 4 trials, they've resulted in kind of the withdrawal of a drug over a period of time. An example of that is the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, an NSAID, N for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, SAID, so that's an NSAID. Vioxx was used in the early 2000s, late 1990s, but was withdrawn from the market in 2004 because in a population of patients that were using it over a longer term, it was causing very harmful side effects, and in some cases death to those patients. And so that's an example of a drug that was pulled as a result of continued study. Now, if we take a look at this, and again, the goal is to try to find something that's going to help the patient, that's going to help treat the disease that we're looking at. When we're talking about drugs, a placebo is something that often is described. A placebo is a drug, or at least a a component or a compound that has no effect on the disease. So you can think about it as an inert substance like a sugar pill, a salt pill, something like that. Some cases it's a sham surgery, other procedures that are, by good evidence, ineffective at treatment of the disease. But you're giving the patient something that ideally is going to put them into a better kind of mindset, because something is better than nothing. What we see is that many patients report a placebo effect. And so if you give them a drug, even though if that drug doesn't have any effect on the condition that they're going to be taking it for, about 1 in 3 patients will report improvement after receiving a placebo. And there's some good studies on that where patients will, get a sugar pill. And the doctor, kind of sets it up properly and says, okay, take one of these, or, as you need it. When you start to feel pain, you start to feel anxiety, you take this and it will make you feel better. And even though it's a sugar pill, the act of taking the disease, kind of the mindset of thinking that it's going to be helpful to them, is enough for them to feel some relief for the situation that they're facing, that they're trying to treat. And so that's interesting. So again, that provides good, strong evidence that the mindset of a patient kind of going through in a treatment is very important for a favorable outcome. What's interesting is that the placebo effect is patients getting this kind of non-effective treatment, but thinking it's having an effect. Some patients also report a nocebo effect. A nocebo effect is basically an unpleasant side effect from a placebo. So they're getting the same type of sugar pill or kind of inert substance, but they're feeling that it's making them worse. It's causing some other problem. And again, that's generally associated kind of with mindset. Is the thought that what we're looking at here. So again, mindset, incredibly important in the treatment of diseases, and especially for those of you that may be, considering a career where you're going to be, working with people, in medicine or in social work or in public health or, in any other aspect of their lives. Maintaining a good outlook on life, maintaining a good perspective is going to help you in the long run. It's not always easy to do, but there's good evidence that it does have an effect. So if we take a look at this placebo effect is basically looking at, you have this expectation of improvement, and this positive attitude is important at the recovery from this disease process. And so there's, again, a little bit controversial, but very good evidence that there are mind-body connections. And so if an individual is conditioned to expect a relief based on this, their mind is going to put them in the right state so that they can take this medication and feel relief, feel better having taken it. And some of that, again, kind of preliminary evidence at this point is that the brain produces things called endorphins. And these are chemicals that are released in the brain that affect cells within the brain, but they're natural pain relieving chemicals. And so, somebody that's on a runner's high will have these endorphins that kind of flood through their body, and they're going to feel good as a result of that. The idea is that these mind-body connections may be acting in a similar way, that you're releasing these, I don't want to say happy chemicals, but chemicals that contribute to a better outlook on life, a better perspective on life, and just the fact that you're able to do that is able to improve the outcome. Now, what does this mean for kind of alternative medical treatments? We're kind of in a Western medical world where, we're looking for, kind of a drug or a surgery to kind of give us the best outcome for whatever condition we're looking at. But if we take a look at alternative medicines, treatments that are in many cases thousands of years old, we see that there's good scientific evidence that some of these are going to be effective, even though we don't understand how they work. they are effective in the treatment of different conditions and different diseases. A good example of this is acupuncture. And so if you understand what acupuncture is doing, you're basically going in and inserting needles at specific sites along the body. Acupuncture is using needles. Acupressure is using like pressure points. So you're almost like massaging specific areas of the body. And the idea is that you're going to have this flow of qi within the body, this flow of materials along meridians within the body. And the disease process is associated with the disruption of the flow. And if you can restore that natural flow of qi within the body, you're going to be able to treat the disease. And so I can tell you from kind of a Western medical perspective, there's no histological or physiological evidence of a qi flowing through the body. There's no evidence of the meridians, and there's no evidence that these acupuncture points are any different than any other points within the body. But having said that, there's good scientific evidence that shows that acupuncture is an effective pain relief and treatment of postoperative nausea. And so we can't explain this from a scientific perspective. We can't explain this from a Western medicine perspective, but it has an effect. It works for patients that go in, again, with the right mindset. So again, this is interesting when we try to understand how is it we're going to treat disease, how is it we're going to improve the human condition, especially as it relates to different diseases and kind of damage to the body. Okay, so that finishes up our view of clinical studies. Clinical studies, again, as I said, are getting a lot of attention within the news right now because we're looking at a lot of rapid studies being done to try to come up with treatments and vaccines for COVID-19. So I'd like you to take a look and get a good view, a good understanding of what clinical trials are, what their benefits and disadvantages are, what their limitations are, because I want you to be informed when people are talking about, how they're going to be approving these, potential drugs that we're going to be looking at later on. I'm sure I've said that on the previous slide. And so what I've got is the U.S. National Institute of Health, again, the primary funder of biomedical research in the United States, has a clinical trial site. And on that clinical trial site is information about clinical trials. So that's the reading for today. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you and have a great day.